Holloway, who is the program director over at Bed-Stuy Development Corporation, but she is also the founder, if you will, for which is Motivated Youth, building all self-empowerment. So YBASE, and a number of her young folks are in the audience today. Raise your hand. And we of course want to thank our sponsor, Brooklyn Community Board for the lovely lunch and dessert. So, we're not going home with any of that stuff. So, now you can just wrap it up and take it home with you. So, many of us lived through this story. And when we started talking to each other, as we often do about what's happening and what's impacting Bed-Stuy, we said we wanted to do something that was really going to be impactful. We are fortunate enough to hold space in this community and have access to most of the resources that we have. And I'm clear that there are several tales that go on about Bed-Stuy, right? So there's the Bed-Stuy that I reside in that's very rich in resources and people who care and who work very hard to make this a wonderful community every day. But I also know that there are pockets in our community, people who have no idea that these things exist, right? And so the idea for this was to come together and bring in community and have a dialogue about something, as I said before, that many of us live through, but in some cases are still going on today and impacting our youth. And how do we then marshal our resources and figure out how we get those out to folks who need information? And as we all discover when we talk to each other, sometimes we think we know everything, but you'll have an experience going somewhere and come back and bring it back, and so on and so on, and then we're all better off for it. So this last session today really is about processing a little bit more, reflecting a little bit more, but really looking critically at where we are at this moment in time, and what has changed about our criminal justice system. What has changed about the media and media bias, which is what we're going to be talking about today. How are we dealing with mental health and trauma in community based on events like this continuing, and then the space that I live in right now, what are we going to do about it? Yes. When things bother me, I just sit down and strategize about how I fix it, because I can't live too much in the other space, because I'd be crazy. And you'd hear me screaming in the streets. So I try to always figure out a way or get connected to some actions that can help solve the problem. So that's what today's all about. So I want to thank you all for coming again, and we're going to get started. So to my left, and I'm going to let you all do your mini bios, right? Marlon, I think you got to move down because he has me sitting over here, although I want to sit over there. Oh, the screen. I just want you all together. I don't want to look like I'm waiting for somebody else.
I didn't know if he was using the screen.
Oh, no. I am, but I think they'll be able to. Yeah, they'll be fine. So, to my left is Ashley Watson. So, Ashley, tell us a little bit about what you do.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Watson. I'm a clinical social worker here at Bedford Stuyvesant Restoration Plaza. I've been doing social work for the past 6 years. Yes, I look like I'm young. Right? But my specialty is in crisis management. I do a lot of individual counseling, family counseling. I'm from Bedford Stuyvesant. Currently, I live in Cypress Hills. I've worked with ACS. I've worked at Rikers Island. I've worked with Department of Homeless Services, multiple foster care agencies. I provide direct care services to those agencies. So yes, I'm very much all around.
Good afternoon. My name is Marlon Rice. I am, as Stephanie made mention, I am the executive director of Magnolia Tree Earth Center, which is an environmental education non-for-profit here at Bed-Stuy. But I'm a writer by passion. I'm a published author. I've written for Heart and Soul magazine, and I've written for Amsterdam News. And for the last couple of years, I've been the weekly columnist at Our Time Press. My column is titled The Thinker's Notebook. It's usually on page 5. I'm also a producer of a lot of these type of town hall discussions. I work at the Brooklyn Navy Yard currently in Building 77. We do a discussion series quite similar to this, where we bring community issues and trending issues to the community to have discussions about it. And I'm very happy to be here. I'm as I mentioned yesterday, I'm quite proud of the people who showed up and chose to use their Saturday in this manner. I know it's nice out. I know it's a bunch of other things that we could be doing.
Right outside our door.
But we care enough about our community and about each other to engage in this way. And I think that I don't want to just overlook that because I know the sacrifices that each of you made to be here, and I thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kishia Adams. I am the chair of the Justice Reform for the NAACP. The committee is basically, we're here to rally around the issues that's going around justice. It could be social justice, equality, equity in our communities, and we are not letting people go or just giving them a pass of what they did to us. We're holding them accountable and making sure that they're not going to do the same thing. So we have a lot of stuff going on this summer. So we're going to talk about it a little bit later. And also, I'm the criminal justice coordinator for a single men shelter on Wards Island. If you don't know what Wards Island, I can tell you some stories, girl. I deal with individuals that's coming out of incarceration, so I could relate to a lot of what the guys are going through, what we're going through, and now they're successfully integrated back into society.
All right, so we're ready to get started? Yes. So yesterday we looked at the role of the prosecutor, and we had someone from the DA's office, and we talked about the court system, and we were joined by Judge Ellen Edwards, who was here, who talked about her role as a judge. And then we also had our special visitor, Tremaine Wright, our assembly person, was here too, and with some perspective.
Right.
So today we wanna, because of number 3, the third in the series, we really want to talk about the weight of incarceration. You know, what families go through and what, of course, those who, in this case, were wrongfully convicted. So one of the things I do want to say, language is important, and so they don't call themselves, and we've been asked not to refer to them as essential prong 5. They are the exonerated 5, because their record is clear of that felony. So just to say that. So the exonerated 5, they were released in 2002 after another man, as you saw, confessed to the crime, and DNA evidence confirmed his guilt. So we want to talk. We also know that in the episode 4, Corey, one of the boys, was sent to an adult facility. And I just want you to hold this statistic in your heart. There are 10,000 children in the U.S. 10,000 children in an adult facility every day in the United States of America. 10,000 young people still in an adult facility. So as you know, we fought here in New York for raise the age, right? And so we don't have that issue here, but North Carolina is one of those states that still holds young people in adult facilities. So we're going to refer back to this board a couple of times today because there's different actions taking place. And I know people are busy, and some of you are younger and you don't think that you could kind of go out and start your own rally or campaign for something. But there are a number of organizations like Color of Change, Black Lives Matter, the ACLU, that are the NAACP and our Legal Defense Fund that are constantly suing people, challenging people, trying to right the wrongs of the world, seeking equity and justice, and a number of other issues. So this is a way, if you follow these organizations online, that you could find out how you can help. You literally could help someone sitting in your living room, sitting on the train, just by a click of your phone. So this first one I want to bring your attention to is, the second one, protecting the rights of youth, right? So join the campaign to end life without parole sentences for juveniles in North Carolina. So there's the Dante Sharp case. He was wrongfully convicted in North Carolina. They know this because there was only one. They didn't have any physical evidence, and it was only one eyewitness account who's now recanted 2 years after the fact, but he's been in jail for 25 years. So we're working right now to get him out of jail. So this is one of those things where you can literally just take out your phone, find the link, click it, and say, I don't want this happening in our country anymore. because the numbers are just staggering in terms of how many people are actually going through this every day. So I invite you either now or sometime before you leave to join one of those campaigns. So we wanna talk about the role of media. So you're on the spot. Marlon, you come up first. All right. And this is something, I'm gonna ask Marlon the question, but I know that the audience has, because we all listen to we look at the news, we look at television. The media is a part of our everyday lives. So as Marlon is talking and sharing his wisdom, if there's something that you want to lift up about your experience with media, but more importantly, what we need to do about media bias, we want to invite you to do that. So what were the underlying social and racial factors that led to the lies being spread about the teens and made them guilty in the public's mind?
Okay, so.
And then whose job should have been to set the record straight?
Okay, so let's start by creating for you the landscape of New York City on April 19th, 1989, when this crime happened. And I say crime because in having this discussion, I don't want to discount the fact that this woman was raped. A crime did happen. You know, the exonerated 5 didn't do it, but she was raped, right? So on April 19th, 1989, let's look at this landscape of New York City. In 84, you had Eleanor Bumpers, right? Murdered by a cop in her apartment. In 86, you had Michael Griffin. Remember him? Howard Beach, running across a highway and gets killed, being chased by white guys. In 87, you had Jesse Jackson's Hymantown, right? When he said that. So New York in the mid 80s was a melting pot. It was like fish grease when it came to racial overtones in the city, right? Like a lot of people don't look at a place like New York as having racial issues, but in the mid 80s in New York City, we had an abundance of racial issues, right? So that is the environment that existed at the time when this crime happened. The second thing you have to understand is that newspapers are for-profit businesses. Don't let that go over your head. What I just said was that newspapers are for-profit businesses. What does that mean? That means that they produce in order to get money. The goal of running a business is to gain capital, to gain a profit, right? So I've written for numerous newspapers and periodicals. A lot of what people don't understand is that a lot of what you write is truncated into words. So they say, give me 1,000 words about this. Give me 750 words about this, right? So what makes a writer special, right? What makes a reporter special? Is it how he gets the facts, or is it how he relays the facts in a way that's so provocative that you want to read him? Think about some of your favorite books. Why do you like to read them? Because they detailed things in a way that was so provocative that it kept your attention, right? Bylines are very important in newspapers. When you look at the daily news, those headlines sell the paper. So a term like wilding, at a time when there's so much going on in the way of racial overtones in the city, that byline sold a lot of newspapers. So the environment that New York City was in during that time matched with the need to sell newspapers. I tell people all the time, media is inherently biased.
Yes.
You should not look to the media for the truth. You should do independent research to look for the truth. You should read 5 or 6 or 7. Try this. Take a topic and read like 5 different articles about the topic, and you'll see immediately that people are coming at it from different perspectives. Read the New York Times article about a topic, then read the Post. A great example was the young kid that just got he's wrongly convicted. It will come out at some point, but he just got convicted of killing the jogger, right? Read the New York Times article about this, and then read the Post. And you will see a vast difference in how it's reported. In 1997, I grew up on Green and St. James and Clinton Hill. In March 9, 1997, A guy that grew up in my neighborhood named Christopher Wallace,
Yes.
rapper Biggie Smalls, was murdered in LA, right? So he's murdered. His funeral takes place maybe 2 weeks after. My sisters at the time were seniors at Boys and Girls High School. So they leave our house on Green and St. James and they walk down St. James Place to the C train. A reporter named Michael Daly for the Daily News, he's well known. Everybody here has read a Michael Daly article. He approaches my sisters and says, listen, I'm doing an article about Biggie Smalls' funeral and I wanna interview you guys. Can I interview you? They say, you gotta ask my father. He goes, they walk back to my house and Michael Daly asks my parents, can he interview my sisters for Biggie Smalls? Because today is Biggie Smalls' funeral. No problem. They interviewed him. He went about his way. The funeral was that afternoon. The next morning in the paper, across from reporting about Biggie Smalls' funeral, Michael Daly wrote an article about twin girls that live in Biggie's neighborhood that because school was so important to them, they didn't care to go to his funeral. And the way in which he wrote the article said basically that they had more important things on their mind than Biggie's funeral. And while all these kids were on St. James Place celebrating this guy's life, my sisters thought it was more important to go to school. The twist, do you see the twist? Like, okay, right, so yeah, so they didn't go to the funeral, they did go to school. If you knew my father and mother, you would know why they went to it. The thing, right? But to pivot in a way to say they don't care about him, to show, well, not everybody cared about Biggie Smalls.
Right.
That pivot was designed to be provocative to sell papers, but it wasn't true. So you have to understand that media does that every day. Every report that you hear on CNN or you read in the Daily News is pivoted to get your attention.
Yes.
And in that pivot, they may be stretching the truth. What was the second question? I'm sorry.
No, that's good. So I actually want to ask you this question too, because I want to put the racial overlay on it, right? And so, and just by show of hands also, would this story have been different had it been 5 white boys in the bar?
It's water wet.
And when we talk about the sensationalism as it relates to capitalism in this country, is this really a new phenomenon for Black and brown people, right? When you think about the history of storytelling about who you are. And if the answer to that question is absolutely, because they've always done this, then what should be our responsibility, our collective responsibility to telling our own stories?
Okay.
Or being able to, as young people say, clap back when these stories that you just described happen.
So to answer part one, there's a narrative in America about Black men and women, about Black boys and girls. We all know some of the narrative, and unfortunately, some in our community perpetuate the narrative. What's the narrative? Black men are oversexed. Black men are aggressive. Black men are lazy. Black women are oversexed. They're nymphomaniacs. You know what I'm saying? They have an attitude, mean Black girl syndrome, right? Right. No fathers in the house, right? Every Black man I know that got kids take care of their kids, but ain't no Black fathers in the house, right? So these narratives exist in America, and anytime that the white supremacist construct has an opportunity to reinforce those narratives, they're going to reinforce those narratives. If it was 5 white guys and not 5 Black guys, there would be no need to reinforce a narrative, right? Because, okay, their narrative would have been reinforced, which is successful, which is prim and proper, preppy, normal. White in America is normal, and everything outside of white is abnormal. So part of what we have to do, and why, so this is why, this is something that I take on personally, is it's important that we tell our own stories.
Yes.
And not in white framework, because people think that you can do that. People think, yo, I'm gonna go work for the Times and I'm gonna tell our stories. No, you're not. I've had tons of articles that I've written for Amsterdam, that I've written for Heart and Soul, that were kicked back because I may have said something that may have been deemed too black. And Heart and Soul is a black-owned, well, it was a black-owned publication. Amsterdam is a black-owned publication, but you can't, even in those frameworks, it's difficult sometimes to speak with full truth, right? So, but now we have technology. So now, and this is one thing I love about the youth, like young people get out and they speak without boundaries or filters. Like they blog, they go on Instagram, they Snapchat. They have opportunities to make their voice heard in a way that can't be filtered. Twitter is a great source for that. I laugh every day about the things that I read on Twitter because people don't, like, the gatekeeper's gone, right?
Yes.
And believe me, publications are suffering, newspapers are suffering,
That's right.
because people no longer go, I remember every day going to work, I would buy the Daily News and read that thing cover to cover. I can't tell you when's the last time I bought a Daily News. So we are in this battle, and to be perfectly honest with you, we are kind of winning the battle. We need to reinforce independent sources, right? So Our Time Press, this is James Buck. Our Time Press, you need to read Our Time Press, because Our Time Press is going to give you the news without a filter. We write about what we want to write about at Our Time Press. I'm trying to tell you, Bernice, David, some of you guys may know them. They give their writers freedom to write. I don't have to have an editorial meeting with David to write about something. If I want to write about something, I'm going to write about it. I'm going to submit it, and he's going to put it out because he trusts that I'm going to speak my mind on an issue. And and so we have to support our independent sources. But quickly, you said what was the last thing you said about I got it.
It's incorporated the answer, but I did want to follow up and end the discussion on this particular point, and you brought it up, the role of social media in telling our own stories now.
Right.
We are doing it. There's we all know we have Twitter, but there's Black Twitter, right?
Yes, there is.
Black Twitter is not like a thing that you can find. It's just, it is what it is. But how do we really use that, especially in cases like this? Like, explain it to people who might not be on Twitter every day or know what it is at all. How do we use social media and blogging right now to talk about the cases that are disturbing? How do people clap back on Elizabeth Firestein for her role in the Central Park Five? Can you just talk a little bit about that?
So Twitter when we talk about Twitter specifically, one of the good things about Twitter is that everybody has a Twitter handle. So you can have a Twitter handle, you have a Twitter handle, you have a Twitter handle. And if you post something under your Twitter handle, I can repost and reply to your Twitter handle, right? So Donald Trump gets this every day because anything that he posts, 100,000 Americans clap back at him, like, shut up, what are you talking about, you silly? And it may seem juvenile, but it's an opportunity to speak truth to power immediately, right?
Yes.
So if you follow me on Facebook, you know that I'm quite loquacious, right? But I use social media in a way to incite discussions on things, because I think talking about things is important, right? So for me, it's not so much on Facebook and Twitter. For me, it's not so much reporting things. For me, it's like, I want to hear your opinion. I want you to hear your opinion. So I'll put things out there to engage in conversation. That's a great way to use social media. There's a lot of corruption in social media, right? And I mean, that's a whole nother discussion. But the good in it is we can communicate at the speed of light about whatever it is that is on our mind, and we can have dialogue that isn't encaptured by any boundaries, right? So we can have what young people would call real talk. And use social media for that. Don't just look at pictures and like pictures. Like, don't just share articles. Speak your mind and let everybody that follows you hear what you have to say about something and tell them to share it. I've had things, I've had things go viral that I didn't expect would go viral. Like one time I had a Facebook Live discussion with a transgender woman, and we discussed the fact that so many transgendered women are murdered. And I was completely blind to the LGBTQ community in a general sense, but specifically to the plight of transgender people. And so that conversation that I had was enlightening for me. It was something that I didn't expect, and it had like 60,000 views. It's like up to like 60,000 views. So 60,000 people got to hear the conversation between a transgendered woman and a straight man about the plight of transgender. That's phenomenal in a way, in a world where in the Black community we don't have those discussions.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying? If I say Happy Pride Day, there's gonna be friends of mine who'll be like, "What you mean? Happy Pride?"
That's
Like, you on that gay shit? Like, you know, that ignorance, right? So use social media as a method to kind of break down some of those walls and be firm in how you talk. Be confident in how you speak on social media. Don't just be a consumer.
And the interesting thing about that is, and it's something that we're actually going to tackle during our convention in July this year in WACP. But when people want to parse, right? So if you say that you're for justice, you're for racial equality, and you're for, and you understand racial profiling happens, then you have to know that transgender people are being killed 10 times more Black. They're Black. So you can't parse out and say, okay, well, I'm not going to be on the justice bandwagon for you because you're transgender. You're Black as well. And then when we get to the fact that everybody is human, then we'll really be getting somewhere. And I need people to be able to see that.
Right. If you really love your community, right? If you say, I love my community, right? And you mean that, then you mean you love everybody in your community. You can't be intolerant of certain, like you can't say, I love Bed-Stuy and not love transgender people in Bed-Stuy. Like you're being hypocritical. Like, so if you really truly want to give of yourself and say, listen, I love Black people. I love Black people. That means all Black people. You know what I'm saying? And you have to commit to that.
Even the ones that we can't give the mic right away.
Right.
Because they have to work.
Right. Like you can love them from afar. You can love them like this. Like y'all love you over there. Stay there.
So we're going to do a couple questions for Marlon, and then we're going to move over and have a mental health discussion. Tracy, and then
So, Marlon, I appreciate what you said about social media, but with great power comes great responsibility and great care. Can you talk about some of the pitfalls of speaking out, using your social media platform and ways to safeguard yourself and to protect yourself? Because, you know, we do have freedom of speech, but there are also consequences that come with that speech.
Right. So the first thing is, you're right, you have freedom of speech, but you can't yell fire in a movie theater, right? So you have to first have a strategy. And that's probably what I didn't say that means the most, is you need to have a strategy with how you engage, right? Which means, first and foremost, you need to do research. Like the things that you have an opinion on, you need to fortify your opinion with facts. One of the greatest ills of adults in a general sense, but Black adults more specifically, is that at some point they stop reading. Right? They stop educating themselves. If you're not educating yourself and you're just speaking randomly on opinions, then you're just loud and wrong. Right? So you do need to have a strategy. But you know, the other thing is that there's a very wicked groupthink mentality in social media that I don't like.
Yes.
Where everybody wants to be the first to, like when John Singleton passed away, before the brother was dead, people was rest in peace, Singleton, rest in peace, because they want to be the first, right? So there's this narcissistic groupthink mentality that you have to battle with in social media. And you also have to understand that when you say something, there's always going to be that contrarian. No matter what you say, they're going to battle you on it. People go to social media to have like internet wars, right? You gotta have a strategy with how you engage in any line of communication. So for me, like I want to engage you to think. I want to incite thinking. I want to say something that causes you to think about what I say and challenge me on it, right? And so that's how I approach social media. But you gotta have a strategy.
quick follow-up, would you be willing to do a workshop, for people?
Yes, we'll talk later. Yes, I will. Yes.
It's, listening to you on social media and trying to think about this film and young people in particular, how it's used. Because you have a platform, a lot of young people don't. And even, how do we work with young people that either how to get information out on how to best use it, to work their advantage, especially when they have the potential to get in the most trouble and have, can be pretty much the victims or the perpetrators of a lot of things that are going on in social media. So, how do we take a way to make it, to educate and train them based on what we're seeing is happening? And I guess like some of my frustration becomes is that this is, the exonerated five. There was, there's so much is still going on. And unfortunately, like you said, if you listen to different news, if you read different news, they'll have different perspectives, but sometimes there's only one perspective that's being heard and being perpetuated, and that's just what it is. If it's the one that gets on scene on the main, that's the one everybody was going with. And just like at the, when the Central Park 5, there were a lot of us that fell into that too. They're wild in this wolf pack. We say the same thing about our kids. Yeah, they're out, they're wearing their pants. We perpetuate and we supported a lot of that and fed into what the media does. We still do it today. How do we effectively change that, especially when everybody does not have a large platform like you do?
So two things. First thing is, I respectfully disagree with regards to the young kids and their platform. I was in Albany at the end of May. I spoke at my brother's Keeper Symposium in Albany, right? So I spoke with 200 high school kids. And then after my speaking, I was the last speaker for the day. So I got a chance to converse with these kids and get their Instagram, right? So I'm like, follow me on Instagram. So I have 1,950 Instagram followers right now, right? I tell you, every kid that I met that I got their stuff, they had 5,000, 8,000.
Thank you.
Young kids are much more adept at utilizing social media than adults are, right? They have it, like, it's like second nature. My daughter's 3 years old. I could just give her my phone and she'll go to YouTube, she'll go to My Little Pony, she'll watch it, right? So they're much more adept at it. But the second part of what you're saying, right, is I think that comes from because we are at war. And that's not gonna change.
Nope.
Right? That's not gonna change. We're at war against a construct that constantly looks to oppress us, right?
Yes.
And to identify us in negative terms, right? And we are also at war with ourselves because a lot of us internalize some of it.
Yes, sir.
For as much as I love rap music and I grew up with hip hop, sometimes I look at videos and I'm like, wow, I can't even have my kids listen to it, and me saying this is extraordinary because I was the biggest hip hop head. So that tells you how far away this internalized oppression is going and is seeping into our hearts and our culture, right? But we have to teach our kids that we are at war. Like that part can't be done externally. We have to, in our household, we have to tell our daughters and our sons, listen, we're at war. I need you to be skeptical about things. I need you to think. My father's favorite word to me was think. He used to say to me, I'm gonna wallpaper your room with think, so that you always think, right? But in doing so, he created a critical thinker, right? So we can't be asleep at the wheel when how we deal with our children. We can't dismiss them by saying, oh, they pants sag, oh, they do this, oh, they do that, and just dismiss it. We have to constantly engage them because even if they're not listening at 14, at 25, they'll realize, like I even now, I'm 44 years old, and I'll say to myself, damn, my pops told me that. You know what I'm saying? So you have to plant the seed. If we're not planting seeds, then we're not gonna grow.
The harvest.
Yeah, we're not gonna have a harvest. We have to continue, and then we have to be diligent in that.
Ms. Watson. How are you? Good. So, episode 3, we saw the young men leaving prison and trying to enter the world. Walking into families that had grown and changed and had different priorities, neighborhoods that had changed, a world that was still looking at them as criminals and people not worthy of life, more or less, liberty and happiness. So this is some of the work you do. Talk a little bit about what that's like and how you help folks navigate that reentry.
So, welcome. So I was just talking to Marlon a little bit about a client that I have. She is a 16-year-old female from Brooklyn, New York, and she has 5 siblings that are older than her, all males. Her mother's a single mom. She raised her children on her own. The fathers are not in the picture. All of her brothers are currently incarcerated. So the 16-year-old female, yesterday I wasn't able to attend the viewing because she started to self-mutilate herself. So while I'm sitting there, I'm just thinking to myself, what is going on with our community? What is going on with this young woman? So as she's sitting next to me in her hospital bed, because she's admitted now, she tells me, my mom is struggling to care for my brothers who are not even here. 3 of them have life sentences. And 2 of them may come home. 1 of them is in solitary confinement, and she hasn't spoken to him in about 9 months. Her mother is suffering with depression. Her mother's at risk of losing her apartment. So all of these variables are playing a factor in this young woman's life. And for me, as a mental health provider, I have to dig through it and try to help her find some coping mechanisms. But how can I do such thing with limited resources in our community to help the problem that's beyond the trauma? See, the trauma is not with just this young woman and her cutting herself.
Exactly.
The trauma goes back to home and her brothers being incarcerated and why they were incarcerated. One of her brothers was incarcerated because he was wrongfully accused of killing someone. And she feels as though her brother didn't do it. My brother didn't do it. So the effects of the family is tremendous, is grand. So what do we do when these young men are supposed to come back into our community? How do we accept them? How do we give them the resources? They're not able to get jobs. They don't qualify for food stamps, maybe Medicaid. They're living off of their families. It's a financial burden. Our homes are tight. You know, some of them are sleeping on the couch. They're taking up space. So how do we provide for them? How do we support them? What tools or skills can I give them? Where can I take them to say, you know what, this guy right here is looking for people to work for him. You can start working tomorrow or next week. You don't have a resume. You were in prison for how long? 16 years, 15 years, these long sentences. You know, you don't understand how to use the social media. So now you're disconnected. You know, what resources do we have in our community? How can I advocate for this young woman who needs to advocate for her brothers? How do we build her up? So my question to the audience is, how do you accept someone back into the community in any capacity? Because it doesn't matter if you're the mental health therapist, the store owner, the neighbor. How do you integrate this person back? Your next door neighbor was incarcerated for several years. How do you welcome them back home? It's not, oh, hey, we missed you. How you doing? We're so glad to see you. What type of conversations do we have? How do we have the conversation? Many of us don't even know how to have the conversation because it's too heavy.
Yes.
It's too heavy. We don't know what questions to ask. We don't know what will be a trigger. We don't know what would cause them to feel as though we're against them. And we actually are for them. Some of us feel like we don't even have anything to give them. But I'm here to let you know that some things that you can give them are resources and support systems. Support systems are community organizations, community boards, NAACP. All of these organizations are here to help people re-enter into the community.
But I wanna lift up something from episode 3. So Raymond Santana Jr. comes back to his house, right? So his dad obviously doesn't know how to have this conversation with his new family, right? The only thing he knows is that, I'm a man and this is my son and he's coming home. And but he has a whole nother life, right? And the wife has a idea about who this person is, and she's not gonna fight her husband for it, right? But she's not gonna make it easy, right? Because in her mind, he's a rapist, and he's there. First of all, the good thing was he was able to come back. A lot of homes, especially a lot of homes that were where families sold drugs together. When you come back, you can't ever live together. Like the young lady you're speaking about, her brothers will never be able to reside in the same house together, right? What does that do for family and to family, right? So the first thing is just really being able to have the conversation about what it's going to mean to have somebody, a convicted felon, living in your midst. And the easy thing to do is say, you can't stay here, because I can't even think about that. I don't have any room for you, I don't have any resources for you, and this, that, and the other. The other thing is we really need to put pressure on the justice system to do a couple of things. And one is, if you really believe in rehabilitation and reentry, then that means it is your responsibility to make that time in, right, worthwhile. So whether it's culinary arts training, but I always tell people, listen, nobody cares if the plumber used to sell drugs because your toilet is stopped up. You just want somebody to come in there and unclog it, right? So there are certain professions and certain skill sets that you can have that people never gonna ask you, whether or not you went to jail before. They just want you to come and fix it. And so all of those fix it jobs need to be told and taught, and the people need to come away with a skill set. Because for the most part, if we look at the history of Black and brown people in prison, it has been because of poverty.
Yes.
The United States has a debtor's prison, the same way old England did.
Mhm.
And we have to get away from just because you're poor, you can't afford bail, or because you have to steal for your family because your family was just crackheads. Now they're opioid exploited, so they get special help, right? And so, but those people raise children.
Yes.
Who that's what they knew how to do, right? And then if you've also been a victim and you're like me, hard to colonize, you look at the United States and their corporate corruption, and you be like, why do I need to go that path?
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
When they still rob and do the same thing, so I'm just going to do it in my neighborhood to feed my family and do what I need to do, right? So there's all these mixed messages that we give people on how they end up. But we have to, number one, I just want to go back to the points I wanted to make. We need to give people real skills so that when they come out, they can find a real skill job. We need hard skills in our community, right? The other thing that we need to do is align the services. The Department of Corrections and the Department of Human and Homeless Services need to be in constant lockstep. The governor and the mayor needs to get their stuff together, and they have to make that a covenant, a pact. It should be seamless services from one to the other. If you've been incarcerated for any amount of time and you do not have an address to go back to, then whoever that social worker is should be having a conversation right now. You should not have to go down to, DeKalb Avenue to apply for whatever services, because they already know you don't have them, right? All of that should be in place before you leave the door.
right.
That's how you keep people from circling back in the system and being crazy, right?
Absolutely.
And so those are simple suggestions that we can petition for, fight for. Same way we got raised the age, same way we got all the other justice reform pieces that we've done. We have to demand these common sense pieces so that our folks aren't in need and in danger again. And then they're also not overburdening their families. Because as you can see, folks put money in commissaries even when they don't have it, because they want to make sure if you got to bribe somebody to stay safe, right? Or have some extra loosies that you can sell, so you can stay safe, right, on both ends. And now when you come back, you have to be responsible for all of that. So we've gotta look at that and really figure out what the pathway is. But then of course, we wanna be very preventative, right? And we wanna figure out how we keep folks out of the system, as well.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
As someone who deals with individuals coming out of incarceration every single day, we have to ask questions. The parole officer, probation officer, all they want to do is just throw them back in homeless shelters. The first thing they do is take them on to 30th Street, you get your intake, and put them in a shelter. We have to ask questions because most of the time, I'm always fighting with parole. That's one. Me and parole always at it. They know me by my first name, even down to Albany. They know me by my first name. I don't play that. So I fight them all the time. Like, okay, does this client have somewhere to go? Oh, I don't know. Did you not ask? Oh, I don't. Ask questions, because most of the times the client has somewhere to go, and we put them right back in the community because they don't need to be back in the shelter. They don't need to be in the shelter because, again, like Stephanie said, if that cycle is going to start, continuing, we don't need that. We need them around people that love and care about them, back in the community who love them and have them excel. Give them resources.
Real quick, I just want to tell a story to align with what you're saying. So before I was working at MTech, I was the director of operations for Promotion House Men's Shelter, right here on Jefferson, right? Let me tell you a story about a guy named Michael Rivera. I'm gonna be very quick. On November 29th, 2017, a store on New York on Herkimer and Nostrand, one of those suit stores, was robbed overnight. Michael Rivera was an employee at one of those stores. They arrested Michael Rivera for the robbery. He was he was in my shelter, he lived in my shelter, right? They arrested him. What happened was someone broke in the middle of the night, stole money, stole items, and they arrested him because he had an argument with the manager and they fired him. So they said, oh, well, he robbed the place, right? So in the homeless shelter system, 10 p.m. is bed count, right? So you sign for your bed at 10 p.m. and then you're not allowed to leave, right? So it just so happens that on November 29, 2017, we had an incident that night where another resident got beat up by security and we locked down the facility. I came back in, I was there all night, and Michael Rivera had signed for his bed. He was in the facility, right? They arrested him, sent him to Rikers. He could not afford bail money. He sat in Rikers for 9 months. His mother, it gets better. His mother was on her deathbed, and out of pity, his uncle put up the bail money so that Michael Rivera could come home and see his mother in her last days. Michael Rivera gets bailed out. His mother dies a week later, right? So now he's going to trial for the robbery, right? He didn't do it. I know he didn't do it because I was there in the facility and he was there. We send tapes to the district attorney or whoever. We send them to DHS. It's a process. They have to go to DHS legal. We send DHS the tapes showing that he was in the building, right? They take him to trial. No one is coming at this man's defense, right? Now I've left Pamoja House. Now I'm working where I'm working now. His attorney calls me and says, listen, we really need for you to come and advocate for him because we don't think that unless somebody comes and advocates for him, we think that he may be convicted, right? Now, I could have been the type of dude that said, I don't work there no more. I don't care about Michael Rivera. But I went and I sat in and I answered questions, right? I did a deposition and I answered questions. Long story short, Michael Rivera was just acquitted this past week of the robbery. But had me and others, because it wasn't just me, my regional director, my program director, we all worked together to try to advocate for him. But if it's not people like you, if it's not people like that advocating for them,
That's right.
the system don't care about them. The system don't care about these homeless men. They could go from homeless shelter to jail, to homeless shelter to jail, and no one would worry about it. So I just wanted to bring that up because what you're saying is absolutely true. They don't care.
I just have a quick question for you. So there's no universal protocol in terms of questions that they have to ask when they're discharged? That's not a part of their discharge, or they just ignoring it?
They're supposed to, but most of the time, most 9 out of 10 times, they like to keep all their clients in one area so it'd be easier for them to visit them.
Wow.
Right.
So if I have everybody that I have on my caseload on Ward Island, I don't want to be if I have everybody that I need to see in one place, I don't need to be bothered. I come there every Tuesday night between 6 and 10. PM, I know all my clients are there. So I don't need to go run after this person in the Bronx, run after this person in Brooklyn, or wherever. Everybody is there. They don't really ask questions. They don't care. All I need to know is they have a caseload and they see their clients when they need to, and that's it. That's it.
So that leads to a bigger problem too. It's burnout with casework, social work, and social services. You know, we don't have enough staff and resources to deliver the services properly. So you try to take these shortcuts. I have a caseload of 150. I can't ask each one all of these questions and get out of here by 5 p.m. to take care of my family and do the things I need to do. So, you know, that is a bigger problem.
I have 210.
Oh.
I have to tell you, so let's talk about those two things. Hold that point, 'cause I want to circle back to that. But I do want to bring you all's attention to, if you have Netflix and you're gonna go back and you're gonna look at it, there's and you can just Google this. Oprah did an interview.
Yes.
With, how many people saw that? Okay.
I did.
You did an interview with the actors and who portrayed the exonerated 5, and then in the second hour, she interviewed the 5 men.
Yeah.
And so you know the 4 went to juvie and Corey Wise went to the adult prison. Even through that though, Antron McCray
Yes. Yes.
admits that he is broken and damaged.
Yes.
And
Yes.
the only hope he sees is in his children. And so he lost his mother. And that has taken him to another place. And so Oprah tried to ask him about therapy and said, don't you think that therapy would help you, right? You've been exonerated, you know, all your guys are back together. You live in Georgia, you got a beautiful wife who you admit that you love, you got 6 beautiful kids, he has 4 boys and 2 girls, right? And she tried, you know, in the context of the show, she tried to pull him in and he was, nope, he said, my wife's just been trying to get me to do this. No, I hate my father and I just can't get over it.
Yes.
And so then there's the overall Black people don't like therapy because we're not telling nobody our business, right? So we have those 2 things happen. So can you talk a little bit about seeking help? And what's a good, not a good way, what is some strategies to get people to your doorstep or other therapists, and the type of therapy people can go into as well?
So one thing that Restoration is currently doing is more group therapy and community therapy, because I feel as though individual therapy may be too intimidating, too uncomfortable. You're not ready to fully open up to someone right now. But, you know, there are options of you coming to a group session if you want to come to Restoration. There are a family center. There's so many different resources in the Brooklyn community. Also, inside of the schools, they have school-based therapists for the young people that are here. Reach out to the school-based therapists, talk about these things. If you feel uncomfortable in school talking about it, try to talk to a friend or a family member. Therapy is not just a licensed therapist or social worker. Therapy is someone that you can confide in, someone that you trust, someone who is non-judgmental, a pastor, a priest, your teacher, your guidance counselor. That's therapy. That's someone there helping you process things that are going on in your life.
And to that point, when they asked him what happens when things get tough, those are raised antenna sounds.
And that's his
And they talk about, you know, what if this happens to your boys? They said they have conversations with their sons all the time about how to protect themselves. And you don't say anything in the first phone call. He said the first phone call is me, and then Raven said us. He said us.
Yes,
Because we're going down there together. And so that's what he does. You know, he plays sports. He loves on his family. He goes and he visits with his boys when it gets really bad, and that's all he can do right now. Right. That's what he can do right now.
And guess what? That's what's best for him.
Yes.
That's what's best for him.
Yes. But I think that we've had, I think through the partnership at Interfaith, last year, 600 people took the mental health first aid course, which was great, right?
Yes.
And so now the next level is letting people know that there's this network of people out that know some stuff, that can share some stuff. Other people need to take the course. But I think it's a part of our lexicon now. A lot of people are saying, we need to get mental health professionals here. Yeah, right? So I think we're moving forward, right, in terms of the acceptance of it. Now it's really having a list. And I think the councilman just recently put out a booklet of mental health professionals that people can connect with too. But I certainly like the idea of whatever group and circle you are in, your sorority, your fraternity, the age-friendly ambassadors, whatever it is that you belong to, yeah, they'll get you straight. Whatever you belong to, right? So there's 2 questions, but because we're at time, I'm gonna take the questions, but this is what I wanna do. I just want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we're doing at the NAACP, and then we'll open it up for questions and dialogues. We're going to ask that you please share this piece because there's been a lot of know your rights, stop by the police. So we just really kind of updated a previous brochure from 2012 that we did to add. What do you do when you see something that's bad and you want to film it? What should you do? And then, of course, does everybody know the CCRB?
Yes.
The Civilian Complaint Review Board, right?
Yes.
And so do you know that they are actually advocating now through the charter revision?
Oh, yeah.
Well, some people want to get, no. What the CCRB themselves are actually petitioning to have their powers strengthened and expanded, right? They want subpoena power, right? They want to be able to be more of an independent investigator and actually, once they get the evidence, not have to wait for a special prosecutor or the attorney general, but to say, hey, we got the evidence on you, we just can go right now to the district attorney's office and hand over the file and let them do their thing. So this is gonna be on your ballot on November 5th. Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff around the charter revision, but CCRB specifically will be on there. But they are a resource. If people should know, and especially if you don't feel comfortable about going into the police station to report a police, you can call 311 or you can call their direct number. An investigator will call you. There are council members that participate in that process. The council member here did when I was in the office. We have regular visitation on Fridays. You could come and you could make your complaint, and then they would come and take your entire statement and get the ball rolling. And so you can go online and find out where that happens. But this is just information that we want people to have, because all of this is about knowing. When we go back to that first episode, right, and what parents were able to get accomplished because of what they do. And in this community, again, we have so many resources.
Yes.
How many parents ever thought about having their kids join the Explorers?
Yeah.
One, right? So does everybody know what the Explorers are?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Is there a reason why the other parents in the audience didn't raise their hand? Is there any reason why you never thought about having your child as a part of the Explorers for one summer, one season? So the Explorer is a group of young people that work under the direction of the youth officers at the precinct. And they learn about law enforcement, and they do community service. And it's one of those opportunities as we look to strengthen the relationships between police and civilians. It's a wonderful opportunity for young people to start looking through the eyes of the police officers in terms of what they see, and vice versa. Our community affairs police and our NCO police officers have a different relationship and a different outlook on who is in any particular community because they get to see them as people and humans and not suspects, right? And so I always, when people say, we gotta do something about the police, I was like, okay, but which police? Because we also know that there are detectives, there are other people who are on beats, and then there are other police who are in who come to our neighborhood. They're not assigned to a precinct. Right? So that's why identifying folks, right, paying attention to what videotaping is very important, because you have to know who you're dealing with. So if you've ever got a ticket, I always say, did the police give me that ticket or was that DOT? And it's usually a DOT ticket because it was the police. They know Brooklyn's a borough of churches. It's Sunday, you're not getting ready to give me a ticket and I'm parked outside French Street there before you mind, right? But the other folks don't care about stuff like that, right? And that's what being a part of a community, is. You know, Richard Pryor used to have a whole skit around having a relationship, you know, with police, right? You know, white people say Officer Simpson,
Right.
right? We running the other way.
Right.
Exactly. So I think the force, and especially under the direction of Chief Madry here in Brooklyn North, we've done a lot to improve relationships. So I was at a justice reform, and then I'm gonna go to questions. I was at a justice reform event in Brownsville. And people were complaining about a bunch of stuff that had happened to them. So I pull out my PVA card, and I said, well, does anybody know what this is? And I was like, I don't know what this is. I said, well, I have this card because I just happen to be an active member of my community. I have 2 precincts that I cover on a regular basis. We do a national night out against crime together. And it is a card that basically says that you're friends with police. It's not a get out of jail card. So if I decided I was gonna rob a bank, me and my car to go to jail, right? However, when the crazy people stopped me because my hair happened to be wet and it looked like I had a white turban on at 2 o'clock in the morning, taking my daughter to the hospital, I can use that card and say that. And so young people who get exposed early and have a relationship and a connection can be card carrying members too, right? I think everybody should have a card, right? If we can build those relationships. So I wanted to say that. So Oma had a question, and then we'll take some others. If you remember your question, sorry.
Yeah, it's not more of a question, but like I said, I always want to keep in the context of some of the resources and go back to something that actually said on what as a community is out there and what we can do, just to put things in context. My base, motivated youth and self-empowerment, is just a small group of young people that I take with me in school and out of school, but part of it is really trying to teach them about civic engagement and get them exposed to people. We kind of assume kids who come from certain families or don't come from certain families, and even adults, we don't know who's out there who are resources. I bet many of you can't say who's on the community board or who's the precinct captain. I mean, who's the captain? I'm confused on a whole lot of things. But, you know, we don't know who all the elected officials, and probably sometimes don't even know what they do. And I guarantee you most young people are not registered to vote. They don't understand why they should be voting. They don't understand what the politics are. And they've never really been exposed to anybody. So a lot of times of just trying to get them in the room, trying to just, because most of the time we have conversations about young people and young people are never in the room, ever. And so then the conversation definitely starts veering off to something else because they're not in the room. And most of the time when they're in the room, they don't know what to say anyway sometimes. So how do we teach them to do that? But in terms of resources that are here, especially in the context of this, there are organizations that are right here in the community called Children of Promise, New York City. And Children of Promise is for children of incarcerated parents. And not only is that, because there's a cycle, trust me, when you get into the system, now there is a cycle and it impacts the entire family. It also has adolescent psychiatric services that they do Medicaid billing, but it's like if you don't have to be part of the program, but if your child needs psychiatric services or support, they also have resources there. Ashley, who is providing this service here at Restoration, I've utilized her as a resource for my family, and she is fantastic in her team, and she works with MSW interns and have a team. But you talk about having a young person that wants to feel comfortable with another young person, and yes, you look young and you are young, but here's a resource right here at Restoration that probably most people didn't know is an actual resource here. The door. And I'm going to tell you what becomes one of the most disturbing with our kids, and some of this is even indicative on what some of the challenges people have when you're poor. How many young people are homeless, and then they get caught up in the adult homeless system, which is another thing that could be there are not that many resources, but places like Ali Forney, places like SEO, The Door. And The Door is a great resource because it is child-centered. They don't like adults to come in. They will, and they have resources everywhere. A young person can come from anywhere and get everything from legal to free food. They can get counseling services. They can get workforce, and even recreation, just to sit and just hang out. And a lot of LGBTQI services. So I think it's also important that we who have a young person connected to us try to find out what resources are out there for you as a family member, but also that young people can access. Because I guarantee you, we stick to one or two things that we think we know, but you need to know the range. There's a range of things that are out there that you can have that can be a tremendous support and how to access it quickly. Because we don't, a lot of times when our young people get in trouble, we don't have a whole lot of time. Well, they'll end up 9 months in Rikers. If you don't immediately know where to go, who to call, and how the process works, and you have to get them engaged. And because this came up yesterday, just one more thing. Understanding about voting and is also teaching our young people that it has an impact on them sitting on a jury. And we should not be running away from juries. So
And that being the bottom rung, right? Because then who do you elect as your DA and who do you elect as judge?
I didn't
So
want that
the
to be
entire
mixed,
court system is impacted by our vote. Absolutely. Young people, do we have a young person question? We had a couple of young people conversations yesterday, or a senior question.
I've got a
Yes, ma'am.
senior about young.
Okay.
I started with Brooklyn in WTSU when Mrs. O'Gorman was your head.
All right now.
And that was when you were picketing downstate to get blacks into the workforce.
All right.
And I was there the day they sicked the cops on horseback. So all of this is being lost. If the kids knew the history and some of the background, I think they would feel better about themselves. That somebody walked and made a path for them, and it's up to you now to continue this. And I don't see that occurring.
Well, it happens in the NAACP.
You have access.
So we have AXO, we have the youth, and then we have a new program that's called Next Gen. So they take the 25 to 30-year-olds and they literally, I think you get two weeks, and then you have to do whole convention week. And then once they finish training you together across the country, they have to participate in a civic engagement project. And that's how you graduate from the program. And so that work is ongoing. Owners group is ongoing. And this is part of what the reason why we wanted to have this dialogue too. There's a lot of things going on. People are doing incredible work. I mean, even today, I was trying to run and support 2 programs that are going on in the district that have loads of young people who are doing wonderful things, and that young people who aren't connected to something this summer would benefit from being a part of. But getting the information out, right, is what's important. And so when people come to events like this, will you take the information, online? Will you take the handouts and not just keep them and, find it in the bag 6 months later when you want to wear purple again? Or will you make a copy of it and share it with your block association? Send it down south to your cousin. Call somebody on the phone and say, can you believe that X, Y, and Z is happening? Like, this is what we can do from the comfort of our home, on our couch, if you're not that one that wants to go and protest and be out, or start your own program. Because a lot of times what we think about is that it's not happening, so we've got to get together, somebody's got to fund us to do this work. And when we think about the most important work and the most important movements, they were all self-funded, right? Yes. Somebody made chicken so we could eat, right? Somebody drove us where we needed to go or provided transportation. And it was people power that propelled every movement that we've had. So you're so right to ask that question, but we have some resources, we just gotta get some more people, a lot more young people plugged into knowing their history, so that they can do this work, because, you know, my legs are gonna be tired in a little bit, and I need them to take over.
Mine already collapsed.
Listen, I hear, absolutely. Yes.
Can I just add?
Oh, sure, absolutely.
I just want to add real quick to the people power and going out and do stuff. Like, I started a nonprofit just because I went back to my home country and saw there were kids not going to school and they were selling in the street. So I decided, Guyana, sorry, I'm from Guyana. So I packed 4 or 5 barrels and just sent it down with my own money. And the next year I put it out there, people started supporting. Then I escalated into doing care packages. I don't know where I'm gonna get this stuff from. I just, word of mouth. Hey, I'm looking for some hygiene products, some food, some toiletries to give to the homeless on the street. And by the time I supplied about 958 individuals across New York City with care packages. So you never know who else is thinking about it and want to be a part of it just by putting it out there.
Lydia, and then, was there a young person? Is there one? Come right here, my dear friend. Evangeline? Yes, please.
My question is, how come the 5 boys were still sent to vote, 4 of them in Julie and then Corey in actual prison? How come they were still sent there if the DNA didn't match?
That's a really good question. So that was, well, I'm gonna attempt to ask that question, although I'm not a legal scholar, but essentially, they made the case based on the coerced confessions. Right, so they basically said they confessed to it. Why would they confess to it if they weren't greedy? I mean, if they weren't guilty, and so it doesn't really matter that we didn't have the DNA. That was one of the questions that was actually, put to the judge last night too. Like, if you're faced with this information, what would you do? And she explained that, if this was a bench trial, I could look at that and say, that's in and of itself is not enough evidence to convict these young people. But because it was a jury trial, and it was a jury trial in the middle of, with everybody in their 12 biases, as well as what was going on in the media at the time, they were convicted.
But
And today, right, when you think about it, the police officer involved, the detective involved, and the prosecutor both still contend that they were right, and that person was just the 6th person. And although they were awarded $41 million by the city actually has not issued a formal apology.
See, the other thing you gotta understand too is in 1989, DNA evidence wasn't as trusted as it is now. So it was still kind of sketchy, it was still like experimental. And so it didn't hold the same value that it holds.
Yes, sir.
I think I have an explanation that might be a little bit more modern, so that you can kind of update that, because I think there's a little bit more to it. And what they did and the reasons why still happen to this day. Like right now, I was accused of a crime. And what I did was, when the police officer showed up, I was like, oh, because of the way I live, I have evidence, no matter what. Whatever you're gonna accuse me of, I have evidence to prove my innocence, or my guilt. So I don't even need a lawyer. And they were like, well, no matter what, you're just gonna go to the precinct. And I was like, don't you wanna see my evidence? Don't you wanna talk to me? They said no. So I got booked. And then what happened, I can't afford a lawyer, so I took a public defender. Public defender was like, don't worry, we'll get a plea and we'll figure something out for you. And I'm like, but I have evidence. And so he said, you know what, you're gonna go to court and here's a list of some of the things. What do you have to say? I was like, I'll just give you some evidence. And he was like, whatever. I gave him so much evidence that he came back to me and said, it looks like I set them up. So what the court did was they turned around and they tried to get me to take a psych eval. And I was like, for some reason my instinct said no. So I kept telling them no. But they forced me to anyway, because they were just like, you know what, you like the way that your mind works, it sounds like you might have a mental handicap. And I'm like, what the lawyer didn't realize was that years ago, I even questioned my sanity and went to go see a psychotherapist, and the psychotherapist said exactly what the lawyer had said, and everyone says to me, you're so intelligent, so logical, you can't be crazy or schizophrenic. And I even, and so like, I'm like, so it's just the way that I think sounds different. And so I'm sitting there and I'm like, I'm not gonna take this psych eval, something doesn't seem right. They forced me to anyway. And when I went in there, I kept saying, I'm not here on my own volition, you guys are forcing me, but I showed up. I, accidentally missed one. What happens is the psych eval comes back and they say, they took everything I said and exaggerated it to make me sound like a completely different person, but they added in I'm intelligent as well. So I'm no longer allowed to defend myself in court, and then they just pretend that I didn't give them evidence, and I can't complain about it because I'm now supposed to be technically seen as being insane in some way, even though I was working 80 hours a week at 2 different jobs and, have a green belt in Six Sigma and all these other things. And I even took a test to become a special needs aide and passed to become a social worker. They completely ignore all that. Why? Because they just don't allow it to be admitted in court. But what they didn't realize is they messed up, and they said I missed 2 forced psych evals instead of 1. On like the social worker who gave me the psych eval said I missed 2 instead of 1, and so that's even written on my supposedly false psych eval. And so I'm not allowed to say anything, and I'm like, but you're going to say I can't say anything based on, like, let's take everything in the psych eval that was skewed to make me look like I'm nuts, and I'm not gonna say anything right now. But you said I missed 2 instead of 1, and it's on that same document, so how can it be? And they said, I can't speak, and my public defender, who works for the city, will not talk about it.
So one of the things that we covered last night, we certainly understand that bias still exists in the criminal justice system, and it is up to us to remain diligent. But when you have that first conversation with a lawyer, and you're getting any sort of feeling that that person is not responsive to what your needs are, your job is to ask for another defender if you cannot afford another.
I have another public defender.
So this is, we can't mitigate one case, here in this conversation. And so we can have a conversation offline about that, but that is something that was raised last night and that we brought up. Okay, thank you for sharing. Lydia, did you have your questions still?
I have some comments, if you will, because I'm at a state right now where I'm a bit concerned.
Okay, concerned.
I have senior citizens, nephews, and I've been really plugged into this gentleman, Neely Fullard. And so Neely Fullard has a slogan that is really starting to resonate with me. If you don't understand white supremacy, everything you think you understand will confuse you. Keep them confused and keep them moving. And so with that said, I'm all for a good fight, like you started with, I'm about solution, right? I need a solution and I need one as well. But there are areas of life that impact us all, and at the top of those areas are those white supremacists. They control media, they control the law, healthcare, housing, they control it all, right? And so then I'm now at this point where I have to ask myself, I think the young folks should ask themselves as well, is that our only problem, white supremacy, is that our only problem? Or are we inferior, or is a little bit of both? And I'm saying that because we have an open oppressive enemy for about 400 years now, and whatever he's amassed around the globe, we haven't gotten it back. You know, where we started is not disputed. We're having a hard time getting it back with all that we know. And so it raises the challenge of what is really going on. I mean, I'm all for going down fighting, but when I look at the insurmountable odds and evidence that is presenting me in my face, like everything that I need to sustain, even if I get a business, I have to deal with finance. They control it. I want to get an education degree. They control it. So I think we got to first have the conversation of where are we really at and how much power do we really have. I don't want us to go on a different tangent, I want us to start right there. Do we have power, because they're the babies of the planet, these people, right? And they've gone everywhere, and they've conquered everything, and they didn't do it by being nice. And so, no point in history has I seen by their own volition, that they're gonna be nice, and they're gonna play nice. And so, what are we really gonna be able to do? How should we now be moving forward and arming ourselves? Because we are at war. We are at war, they want all these kids, they want more. And so we started also with prison and reform and social work and all of that, but we know we have a problem with one another, we can be toxic to each other, right? We know this, unfortunately. And so we don't put our money where we don't value it either as a government. So whatever we're petitioning is directly over, because they don't use money. So if you don't value us, you're not giving us money for the Band-Aid. You're not giving us money for the cure, you're not giving it to us, right? So now what can we do? We can't do it without the finances to get us going. And we've never gotten that flow. Right? Everyone else got the flow, that's they get the land, we get the money, and so we see that we are not whole still. I want to know, I don't want to be Debbie Downer, I'm just saying, I see the mountain.
You want
It's
to
a
know
long,
the
long way up.
answer to the universe. You want to fix the, you want to fix the world. I'm so
I do.
glad that you ready to
I'm
volunteer to
serious,
answer that question.
because I want to.
There's a couple of things I want to say, but I'm glad you want to.
So real quick, I'm gonna be very
Oh,
brief
yeah, but I'm not
in my
gonna-
response.
We
are
So
in
let me
the
just say
middle-
this, just in case people didn't understand why it was getting so dark outside.
Yeah, it's about to start raining.
It's
No,
like,
not started.
it's about to like,
It's like,
it's bad.
Not to cut this off.
It's
sorry.
not bad.
It's
Turn
gonna be
it
a
off.
shower?
It's,
like, you know, like,
I'm about to stop.
it's gonna be a long one or it's gonna pass?
I'm
So, real quick,
I just want to make
So,
it.
yes,
real quick, sister.
Yes.
Number one, we're in the midst right now, the greatest transfer of wealth between Black African Americans from one generation to the next. Never in the history of Black Americans has so much wealth been transferred from one generation to the next, right? That's number one.